Well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Marty Cottingham. I'm a principal at Avison Young, and I'm very excited to be here today with two very accomplished professionals in their own right, Michael Keogh and Michael Gottlieb. Michael Keogh from Bolton St. John's, and Michael Gottlieb from Avison Young as well, principal at Avison Young. Just a little background on Michael Gottlieb, if I may. Michael is one of the most accomplished real estate brokers in New York City, 30-plus year career, former vice chairman at Grubb & Ellis, on with a focus in downtown, Lower Manhattan. Former Rebney board of director, numerous leadership and recognitions awards, too numerous to list today. What's also notable about Michael is his background. Michael has a law degree from Brooklyn Law School and a Bachelor's of Science in Accounting from NYU. So thank you for joining us. Michael, as stated, from Bolton St. John's, a very dear friend. Michael is a Brooklynite, and in the capacity of Bolton St. John's, he is a significant player, significant advisor, and provides significant counsel to numerous entities around the city. Michael, in his prior life, was Director of Finance for the New York City Council. He also worked in the New York City Mayor's Office for Legislative Affairs. Prior to that, he was also Assistant Director of Intergovernment Aid at New York City Council. Michael has a law degree from New York Law School and a BA from Iona College. So welcome, gentlemen, and thank you very much for today.
Thank you. Happy to be with you, Marty.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
Michael Gottlieb, we're going to start with you, if that's okay. We are in quite a cycle. We're in the midst of an amazing, challenging period on many fronts. Let's spend a moment on the real estate market, the status of the real estate market, and your perspective, if you can enlighten us for a couple of minutes, please.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marty. Great to be here with you and with Mike Keogh as well. I thought that it would be important to really start by giving a historical perspective of where the market has been, how the markets behave, and sort of where the markets are now. And then hopefully as we go through our discussion today, we'll cover some of the trends we're seeing now, and then how we're seeing the potential for the future, recovery, return to office, and what our view is in terms of the path forward. So Matt, if I could ask you to just bring up a slide, because I think this will be an aid in terms of a visual. So this is a historical slide that really is the result of research that I initiated more than 20 years ago, when I was trying to figure out what metric would best reflect the ability to forecast the Manhattan real estate market, and how we would be able to utilize that in order to create strategies for our clients and be able to predict where the markets were heading. And we looked at a lot of different metrics, but the one that actually stood out was the S&P 500. And it was a little bit surprising at first, because we were sort of trying to figure out how could the S&P 500 so accurately predict with 100% correlation where the real estate markets were heading. And ultimately, it became clear to us that really the real estate markets don't operate in what people used to call real estate cycles. They really operate in terms of job cycles. So as people need more, as companies hire more people and jobs are created, those people need a place to sit and an office to be in. And so that created more demand, and the converse was true when the economy was weak and jobs were being lost. But what we found was that there's really an exact 9 to 12 month delay between the peak of the S&P market, or the trough of the S&P index, and the peak in the asking rental rates in Manhattan, and the troughs in the asking rate rental rates in Manhattan. And the question was, why is there a lag? And what we found was that the reason for the lag is that at the end of a cycle on the upside, people stop paying, or stop wanting, or are not willing to lease the most expensive space anymore. And so when the most expensive space remains in inventory and the less expensive space comes out of the inventory the asking rent artificially looks like it's going up, but is really indicating the end of a cycle. And the same holds true on the downside. When there's a recovery, people go out and they bargain hunt and they take the most expensive space first because it's on sale. And so rents sort of look like they're lagging because the inventory supply is the less expensive space still in the index. And so through using this tool, we've been able to, on a current basis, really start to see where real estate markets are heading. And it's based on our view of the S&P 500 index. People generally look at the S&P 500 index as being a leading economic indicator. We really look at it as being a leading forecaster for where rents are heading in New York. And so again, this is all about jobs. And I think we'll come back and talk about that again later.
So Michael, we've obviously seen, with some bumps in the road, we've seen a significant run up in the stock market. What do you attribute that to right now? Is it just because it's a safe, some say it's a safe haven, where else do you park your money? But there's people driving this right now. And I know you spent a lot of time, and I think it's important to share with everybody.
Well, I won't pretend to be a financial service advisor here and really the stock market, but I think that one of the things that we are going to see is that for the first time in 40 years, and if you go back and take that slide I just explained, if you go back 40 years to today, there's 100% correlation. But I suspect that given what we've now been through and what we're still going through with COVID and the way in which people are utilizing offices, I think for the first time, there's going to be a divergence in its ability to forecast the real estate markets. I think we're about to go through a major reset on a lot of different levels and a lot of different areas. And on a going forward basis, it's going to remain to be seen whether or not that still is a valuable forecasting tool for us.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Michael Keogh, you've been a tremendous resource on many fronts with regard to the COVID issues of the day, the pandemic, city and state issues. Would you mind just giving us a brief overview of the landscape where we sit today, please?
Sure, happy to, and pleasure to be with you and Michael. Thank you for having me, Marty. I think that the pieces to sort of take a look at is that government is being asked to do a lot to respond to the crisis, and at the same time being asked to respond to a lot of things attenuated to a historic reckoning with the social justice movement that is currently underway in the country. And that has put a tremendous amount of strain on an already stressful situation because of everything that Michael just talked about shows the depressed economic climate that folks are working in, but that's also leading to less taxable revenue coming in to help the city government do the responsibilities and the things that everybody needs it to do just in a day out normal function. We're in a situation where the city is looking at a probably $9 billion deficit over the next 2 fiscal years. The mayor has already cut $7 billion from the budget that was just adopted in June. There are a number of businesses and entities that are not getting paid because they contract with the services or their full contracts are not getting paid. That is resulting in job losses and reductions of services for the city. And there is as many as 20 to 25,000 municipal layoffs that are on the chopping block across the board in city agencies, just as the city is being asked to make historic investments and challenges. At the same time, the election year that we are in has created this political football of everything from how you respond to COVID to how do you help not just businesses recover, but also the governments recover across the country. So Speaker Pelosi and Secretary Mnuchin are in ongoing discussions about a stimulus package. It is unlikely that they will be able to come up and pass something prior to the election. Whether or not they announce that they will do something it still remains to be seen as we get through this election cycle. It is unfortunate that aid to localities to deal with this disaster and state governments has become a political issue, but it is, and it's affecting everybody at this particular point. At the same time, city is also suffering from reduced local aid that is gathered by the state because the state is dealing with its own deficit. It could well be with the lack of economic activity coming in, lack of federal funds coming in, that the state will also have to chop a sizable portion of its workforce in the 20,000 range and will have to seek reductions of upwards of $40 million out of its $120 million budget. It is estimating that it will need about $60 billion. And if I said million before, I meant to say billions.
Yeah,
So $60 billion to make itself and the localities within New York State whole, and that includes New York City. And just when you think that like things might get better after we get out of the election season, okay, and we'll know what is what eventually after votes are counted, we are already in the midst of a highly competitive mayoral election. There are about 24 individuals in both parties who have filed committees. There are others who are waiting to get in. If we could bring up the mayoral candidate slide just to give folks an idea. Now, this slide we just completed yesterday, and these were folks who have filed committees or are likely to announce that they are. And it's already out of date because Carlos Menchaca, a city council member from Sunset Park, Brooklyn, just announced today that he is running for mayor. And there are more that are expected. People such as Speaker Quinn is weighing a mayoral run. Former Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito is weighing a mayoral run. And there are many, many others that are being testing the waters as to whether or not they will have a say, whether or not they will be running for mayor. There's also important to remember that there will be about 38 city council seats that will be up for grabs. And all of this will wind up getting decided pretty much by the June 22nd Democratic and Republican primaries. We have had overwhelmingly Democratic mayors in the history of the city of New York. Extraordinary times and extraordinary circumstances have resulted in mayoral candidates from the Republican Party. The Great Depression, Phil LaGuardia, a very divided electorate for a number of years, went first with David Dinkins and then 4 years later switched to Rudolph Giuliani. And then you had Michael Bloomberg, who was running significantly behind because of the economic and fiscal crisis or financial crisis that happened in 2008. He wound up becoming mayor in 2009. So it remains to be seen what are the issues that we're going to be talking about. But in all of those instances, there was a lot longer period of time before we got to finalize who the mayor was than we'll sort of see in this particular instance. Just to talk a little bit about the candidates, Scott Stringer is the current city controller. He has gotten people used to voting for him from his time as before being controller as Manhattan Borough President. Manhattan is an important block of votes here. You also have Eric Adams, who is the sitting borough president of Brooklyn. He has run unopposed both times in his borough's race, and he was a state senator before then. He only had one competitive race, and it wasn't really that competitive because he was the dominant candidate in it. So it remains to be seen who will, of the first-time candidates or candidates that have no history with voters either borough-wide or city-wide, will fare in this election piece. But I do think that the fact that we have so many people who are looking to run for mayor in this moment of time speaks to a couple of things. Once, it speaks to a desire for leadership that folks are feeling needs to be answered, and that there are so many people from such a diverse group of disciplines for the first time that any of us can remember in a long time, looking to try to become mayor, I think speaks well towards the city's future going forward, that there are folks who are giving of their time and talent, and there are people like Diana Morales, who runs a significant not-for-profit here in the city, Ray McGuire, who's been a significant finance executive here in the city, Maya Wiley, who is looking to work off of a lot of the work that she has done and being part of her whole life, the civil rights movement in New York, to bring an activist base to things, as well as Catherine Garcia, a former commissioner who's run a lot of things and who knows how to get things done. So it's quite, and that's just a sample. If I went through every single one of them, we would be here for the whole half hour. So I'm going to probably take it at this point as to take any of your questions.
Yeah, while we're on this focus right now, which is significant and obviously very important, and this question is for both of you. Let's start with Michael Keogh, though. What would you say, you've sat in the bullpen, right? You sat in the room with leaders of the city council. What would you say is the priority right out of the gate for he or she who becomes our next mayor? What are the priorities? How to become successful? And that question, please, we'll start with Michael Keogh, but then we'll go to Michael Gottlieb from
you have to do what a mayor is required to do. There isn't really necessarily a Democratic or a Republican way to pick up the garbage or to serve and protect the citizens of New York. And that requires a lot of things other than just how law and order is traditionally defined as. So you have to be willing to take your lumps and defend your record. Mayor Koch used to say that, you might as well take credit for the sunshine because you get blamed for the rain when you're mayor of the city of New York. So you have to find the path. How will I respond to making sure that this industry that you're both very involved in is such an economic driver for so many communities in the city of New York, whether it's the hospitality industry where people are coming in to go to business meetings and so on like that, or going out to restaurants after a long day at the office, or taking taxi cabs or Ubers to try to get to between offices and meetings and so on. So, so much of the city's life is tied to the offices that people used to go and work in. What does that look like in a post-pandemic? How do we get back to that as we get the pandemic under control? I do take heart in the fact that the city is putting together a plan for distributing a vaccine, that there has been lack of planning coming from the federal government about the distribution of a vaccine, but it is good that the city is taking that view. And as we know, with the dynamic between the mayor and the governor will pass on whether or not he likes that particular plan. But it's better that it would be great if all three governments were working well as an oiled machine, but we have to take things the way they are. So the next mayor is going to have to figure out, how do I navigate who's ever in the White House with Governor Cuomo, because they're going to serve at least with Governor Cuomo for their first year in office before he's up for re-election.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. Michael Gottlieb, is anything you wanted to add?
Well, I'm going to take a look at it from a slightly different perspective, which is, how do you continue to grow the economy in New York City? And I think that's got to be a primary focus because, we've really hit a pause on that. And just to give you some perspective here, just the Manhattan office market is 100 some odd million square feet of office space. We track it. Think about it, it's an enormous amount of space. It's more than many, many other cities in the country combined. Here, we would see somewhere between 30 to 35 million square feet of lease activity in the market. Not the expansion, but just velocity, volume. This year, through the end of September, we're barely at 15 million square feet. It'll probably go down as one of the weakest activity years in history, if not the weakest in history. And you have to understand that 8 million square feet of that 15 million was done before March 11th. So what's happened over the past 6-7 months at this point has been almost a grind halt from people making future commitments and just saying, hey, let's slow down, let's see what's going on here. And I think that there are a lot of issues here that people are concerned about. They're concerned about safety issues. They're concerned about the culture in New York. As Mike pointed out, it's true. I mean, you can't go to the theater after work. You can't go to dinner after work. You can't go to a bar after work. So that social element of coming to the office is not there right now. I'm convinced it will come back, and I'm convinced that people will want to be in a work environment where they'll have social interaction as well as business collaboration. But with only 10% of the workforce back in the city, and just maybe not even 10% of the companies telling their people they have to come back to the city, we have to get behind that a little bit and get this thing reinvigorated. It's a big machine, and right now it's not doing anything. So the other side of that's going to be, how do companies view this? Because the largest expense on anybody's operating expense statement is payroll. It just is. And the second largest expense is typically real estate. This work from home experiment is something that no one ever would have done on their own. No company would have ever said, hey, let's just tell everybody go work from home for a year and see how it goes. But because it's been forced upon us, the question is going to be, to what extent does now not become legitimizing the ability to save money on real estate by just saying, okay, we're going to take some percentage of our workforce, or maybe our entire workforce, and close the office down, and we can all work remote because of technology like we're using right now, where people actually see each other. They have meetings, they have schedules. They can't be doing 10 things at once because you're looking right at them. And so what concerns me and what I'm really got my eye focused on right now is one of two things can happen. Probably more, but let's focus on two, right? Companies say, we continue to move towards reducing our footprint, which is where the trend has been, shrink by 20 to 30%, but they were doing that to put more people in less space. That's a trend I think may not come back so fast because of everybody's concerns. But on the other hand, if there's a rent reset and there's a pricing reset and prices come down, then do I keep the same amount of space and just spread my people out more and not worry about cramming more people into less space? If the latter occurs, the oversupply of inventory will get absorbed faster. But if the former situation occurs, then it's going to be a long time before we have a full recovery on the real estate side. And that's what we need to be watching. So, I think there's a lot of things right now that are unclear, but those trends should sort of emerge over the next probably 3 to 6 months, and we'll know where we're standing.
And
Great.
Marty, if I may, Marty, what Michael points out also just exacerbates the problem that the city will have because so much of its taxes are based on the economic activity that is generated by the office space that we have and the amount of people that we have coming in for it. And even the real estate taxes that are paid, if folks are not renting out those buildings, you'll even get the real estate property taxes from the commercial entities will start to come down as well, exacerbating the city's problems in terms of its deficit. They'll be higher than what they are projecting if we can't get back to a place where there is a lot more economic activity just generated from people being around and from commercial real estate buildings being able to pay taxes that the city has grown very used to relying on to help it with its budget.
Yeah.
I think Marty, if I just want to
Please.
onto that, because I think you hit on a very important point, which is real estate taxes as a component of rent. And that's really what it is, because when landlords figure out how much they have to charge, they have to take these things into consideration. And ultimately, the cost of business in New York, have to be commensurate with companies wanting to be here and being able to afford to be here and being able to attract the talent that they want here. But, just to give an order of magnitude here, there's 1.2 million jobs in the city that are dynamic jobs, not medical office jobs, government jobs, not, other transient jobs, but the office using employment that's tracked by our company using SIC codes. If just 3% of that workforce doesn't come back to the city, 3%, for whatever reason, it could be the company shut down, they're working from a remote office, they're working from home, they just got a job, they've been furloughed. If the average person occupies, let's say, even 200 square feet, you're talking about 8 million square feet of space that's no longer needed. And we have new construction being delivered now too, which is just adding to the inventory supply. So there's going to have to be some balance struck between the ability to pass these costs through to companies at a time when companies are revisiting how they use space. And that's going to be a big concern of the city going forward.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. I just wanted to add, you guys, gentlemen, may be surprised, but I'm old enough to remember Ed Koch. Michael, I remember Ed Koch walking around our neighborhood in Brooklyn. And what comes to mind when we talk about being successful, I think it's a pro-business posture. And I think it's the term I like to use is balance, right? I think we could all agree that we need some balance going forward. So, Michael, when you're in the room with these candidates, I'm sure you'll carry that message and well,
I will tell them one important piece, and Michael just sort of hit on it, is the city is going to have another wave of budget deficit in all likelihood because of the folks who are working remotely, who were working in New York, but they are not going to technically be residents and will not pay the residence tax. So it is whatever you want to do in terms of being able to help build back the social fabric of New York and also meet social justice challenges that have long been overdue and need to be met, as well as fight COVID. You need to have the tax base in order to do that. So, and the only way to do that most quickly is to get everybody back to work in as safe environment as possible.
Sure, absolutely. So Michael Gottlieb, Michael Keogh did a great job of his opening statement with regard to the pandemic issues and the status of the city and state and federal response. I think we have a responsibility to our friends here today to share with them, you've proven this. Deals are getting done. What are tenants looking for? What's the driver right now? I think it'll be important to share with everybody, what that looks like, the discussions with the landlords and the successes specific to tenants right now. Thank you.
Well, it's a loaded question, Marty, because there's so many of that. But let's talk about what's going on in Manhattan right now. To the extent that there is activity in the market, and we are seeing signs that it's coming back, I think people feel that the more they hear about vaccines, even just hearing the word on the news every day, makes people feel like maybe we're getting to a better place in this. 6 months ago, no one had any idea where we were going and how long it's going to take to get there. And so we are still seeing some confidence, and there are certain business companies that just need to be in the same place. They can't actually work remotely. But I think what we're seeing, as I said before, we're seeing a reset. And, landlords are reaching for deals. They were before because we were seeing that we were coming to a place where inventory was going to get a little out of sync. But with vacancy rates now rising in the city, with sublet space growing to almost 30% of the overall availability, which creates downward pressure on pricing. We're really seeing an expansion of concession packages, and landlords really saying, look, you know, if there's a tenant out there and I can make a deal, what else do I need to do? And can I push a little bit further to get that deal done and get some, you know, stability and cash flow and know that I have those deals locked up. And so we are, to the extent that we are seeing this activity, deals that were put on hold, I think are coming back. Tenants are looking to make commitments again. They feel like there is going to be a future, and that future is sooner than it was previously. And I also think that what you're seeing is more of a driver that just says, look, at the right price, I'll make the deal if I'm the tenant, right? Not saying there's no price at which I would make a deal. So that's an encouraging sign right there. Another thing that I think we've seen, and this is in a conversation with our Fairfield office, over the summer, we were told that there were 20 deals that were identified in the Southern Fairfield, Connecticut market of tenants leaving the city. What's interesting to me is that the aggregate square footage of those 20 deals was reported as only about 100,000 square feet. But more importantly, that the average length of term of those deals was only 2 to 3 years, which meant people don't really want to make a permanent commitment to leave the city. There is a draw to being here. There's a culture, there's a vibe, there's a, you know, desire to be here, to come back, you know, when things settle down. It's sort of a wait and see thing. So, you know, in that regard, the notion of everybody fleeing the city, maybe to some extent harder to reverse on the residential side, buy a house and you come back in the apartments. But you know, on the commercial side, if you can open up an office remotely, step back for a year or two and see where things are, I think what you're really saying is we're going to go back to Manhattan. The only question is when, and let's see, and if we can get a better deal down the road. And the third element, you know, I would just say is that what we're seeing now also is a shift where landlords are saying, okay, we understand that it's hard to predict the future right now, so we'll be a little bit more flexible. Instead of just saying, if you're a 100,000 square foot tenant, that you've got to commit to 100,000 feet for 15 years or we're not going to make a deal. Some landlords are really saying, I'll tell you what, commit to 60,000 square feet of your 100 for 10 to 15 years. And the other 40 will be very flexible in giving you termination rights, and giving you contraction rights, so that if things do change, you have the ability to exit from that obligation a little bit more easily than it otherwise would be. And so we're seeing some shifts in the market that way as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you. We've touched on it, danced around it a bit with regard to the drive in the office market, right? All of this is a function of the unemployment, right? So Michael Keogh, could you kind of give us an overview of the unemployment landscape right now? And Michael, if you could Michael Gottlieb, follow up with how that impacts real estate, which you've touched on, but specific sectors, if you don't mind.
The unemployment is a terrible statistic in the city of New York. We're at about almost 15% unemployment here in New York City. It is primarily hitting communities of color, just the way COVID has primarily been hitting communities of color, just as some of the civil rights and social justice challenges have been hitting communities of color in New York. And we just see that our future is trying to tackle all of those problems in a meaningful way, so that people will see the hope and will see that there is an environment for which they can come back to work, and that there are the opportunities that Michael just talked about that are here, and that you can take away some of the hurt that is going on by getting people back to work in a safe manner, by finding the revenues to improve policing, so that the community is working with police and not at odds with one another going forward. These are the fundamental challenges that are before us. They're also the path to the economic vibrancy, because once you have these communities seeing increased employment opportunities, every time we see that, every other sector rises as well, as when we have persistent poverty or people struggling. That's when the city lags, and that's when people start thinking about going to other places. So it's important for us to get it right for the bottom, and it makes for building up everybody at that particular point.
Yeah, it brings to mind, before we go to Michael Gottlieb, back in the days on Wall Street, the numbers that were kicked around, for every one Wall Street job, there were 3 ancillary that were created. So I think we can't lose sight of that. Those are important drivers, right?
Yeah, very important.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to ask, we do have another slide, and I'm going to ask Matt to bring it up now since question, Marty, but this is, it's actually not unemployment, but this is employment in the city. And this ties very strongly to the original slide that I had put up there. As you can see, going back to the beginning of this timeline, that as jobs were created, asking rents were rising, and the S&P 500 was going up because the S&P 500 said businesses expanding, they're going to need more jobs. And so as the jobs are created, so too the asking rents rise, and you can sort of see the cycles. To the right, you sort of see what happened now in the red bars. Illustrates that we have lost jobs in this calendar year because of COVID. But this is the city's forecast, and together with Moody's, in terms of how many jobs will be created going forward. And we've always used this as a standard for figuring out how much space will be absorbed as these jobs are created, because this is office using employment only. And if you see from the chart, we don't get back to where we were even over the course of the next 5 years. So it's really going to depend on how people use space. If they continue to reduce their footprint and put more people in less space, or they spread out and either keep the same amount of space or expand. And if they do, then there'll be more absorption of space. But you can take the slide down, Matt. But I think this is really going to be the key to where things go, because if we can continue to create new industry, and then we always go back and say, what did the Chelsea market look like before Google moved into 111 8th Avenue? And that part of town was nothing. It was an industrial section. And, I remember, because I'm old enough to remember, when 111 8th Avenue was, a quasi-government building. It was a transportation hub, and they were renting space there for $12 and $14 a square foot. Before the building was purchased and basically occupied by Google, they were renting space at $80 and $100 a square foot and more. But more importantly, the neighborhood surrounding there started to evolve because there was a draw to being close to Google, to being trained by Google, to being companies that were doing business with Google. And we need to continue to find new industry to bring into the city that will create jobs, because if that we just had up changes to the better, it's going to be a very strong indication of a healthy real estate market. And as we all know, there's a lot of jobs created in and around the construction industry and within the service industry in terms of management, cleaning services, elevator services, everything else that goes along with real estate. We can find new ways to continue to create job growth in the city.
That's an important perspective. Thank you, Michael. Michael, when we talk about, this and the slide that Michael Gottlieb provided, retaining and creating jobs, the business community within the past couple of weeks, month or two, has made a lot of noise, right, about what's going on in the city and the environment, led by Kathy Weil, another Brooklyn person, where there was a letter, signed by 120, 130 CEOs, some real prominent folks in New York City. Can you share some light on what's the status of those discussions? Do they continue? Can we expect something from the administration? And any insight into that would be helpful.
Sure. I mean, it's great that folks are taking the leadership role and saying, here are ideas, here are things that need to happen. And you're right to sort of tie it off on what Michael just said, because a lot that we have seen over the last couple of years, and even just most recently, we have seen development projects or high-profile development projects being viewed as if they're somehow a problem and a scourge to be fought in different communities. And we need to find a path so that we can see how a company like Google, while yes, they've made, because of COVID, all right, work from home for a bit longer as their policy, they are still doubling down on and continuing with their significant footprint that they have built in New York City and all of the attenuating economic activity that has happened from it. We would be talking about probably a much different shape of the city's economy and the path forward if Amazon's project had gone forward in some shape or form. And Amazon is coming and investing in the city at a different scale than what they were doing before, but that would have been a big, significant path forward. I think that we have to find a way where folks are seeing the benefits for development of these kinds of projects. It would have been transformative for the Brooklyn as Industry City project to have gone forward. But there are communities in which some of these projects are located in the outer boroughs that are significant, that feed into what New York opportunities can happen everywhere in the city, including Manhattan. That just weren't communicated as well. And I think that those are the lessons learned from it. We need to engage better. We don't need to dismiss critics. We need to actually respond to them as we go through these different kinds of things. And the mayor, you know, he could have spent a lot more time forging better relationships in his time in office than he has. If I had one criticism, I would say that it was this in particular. He doesn't have the personal relationships with the large companies, with their top management, with the heads of those companies. You have the brain trust of the world located at one point in time in the year at any given time here in New York City. If you're the mayor of New York City and you don't take the time to get to know some of those folks in a meaningful way, then you're missing out on an opportunity that is being done by Mayor Duggan in Detroit, for example, where he's gotten a lot of people, a lot of them located here in New York and in other places, to come and help pay attention to his efforts to rebuild Detroit. We're going to need that kind of vision to not just speak to the people that elect you, but speak to a wide swath and maybe perhaps people who don't elect you. And with so many candidates running for mayor, there is going to be a mayor who gets elected that potentially a majority of New Yorkers do not vote for in the most meaningful election that gets them to become mayor, which is the primary.
Sure. It seems from watching this from afar, it just seems that it's much easier to say no rather than do what you've just articulated, roll up your sleeves and get to work. You know, the local council specific to Industry City said, you know, we need to do a better job of planning projects of the future that include the community. Well, let's start now, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah, exactly. You
know, so
and that's really the unfortunate piece, that it's like I totally understand that, like, you have to build your constituency and not everybody is going to vote for you, but you have to get to a place where you are doing governance for whether it's the entire country and not just your supporters, the entire state, not just your supporters, and the entire city, not just your supporters, because the difficulty becomes, if you don't view the bigger picture and you do something that alienates you from your constituency, and in some instances, it might be due to the handling of COVID, it might be due to the handling of social justice issues. We have seen the three top executives that we're most connected with, as the mayor, the governor, and the president, become disconnected from their bases or portions of their bases, making their governing harder. I think that Governor Cuomo has been the most successful so far in coalescing folks around his leadership, even though there are people who are complaining about his handling of certain aspects of COVID.
Yeah, no, thank you. Michael Gottlieb, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I think you need to remember that this isn't just a New York problem. This is a global problem. And we're focused here today on what's going on in New York, but the world is very connected these days, and I do believe that when the world comes back, companies that are located in New York, many of them are headquartered elsewhere, and if shut down elsewhere, then New York becomes sort of a problem that evolved from a global situation as opposed to a localized situation. So I think the good news there is that the ability for New York to bounce back isn't only tied to some catalyst that happens here in the city, but I think that the resolution of our current pandemic that starts to get the world open again will also help New York. But I'm encouraged, Marty, because you take a look at what Michael said before, which is that Google said, okay, you don't have to come back to work for longer, but you are going to come back to work at some point. We've seen some big companies, some of the financial service companies say, come back to work. Facebook said, you don't have to come back to work till July, and then signed a 700,000 square foot lease and a new building being built over the post office. So, if you really are shutting down and you're really saying there's no future, then you don't do things like that, right? So those are all, encouraging signs. And, a lot of that is just human interaction. We're human beings. We want to see people and we want to be in the same room as people, and we want to be able to, collaborate in person with people too. And I think that that's a shift that will return. I think there's some challenges that we still have ahead, but it's not just a localized issue, and it will come back.
Yeah. On the note of returning folks back to work, just a point. The one I like best is Jamie Dimon, and when he said, we got to get people out of their pajamas and back into their cubicles. So I thought that was great. I'm going to read some stats that just came out today, specific to the market. And Michael Gottlieb, if you could just kind of touch on maybe a little bit of a forecast where we're going, what does this look like going forward? And I think very important for our friends on the line today, how does that impact these assets, specific valuations, and what does that look like? And I think we need to share that with everybody. But here we are. Office occupancy is still below 15%. Obviously, leasing is down 50% year over year. Sublease serves to account for a quarter of all space on the market. We have a 13.3 vacancy rate. This is all Manhattan stats. And just in this past quarter, 13 additional blocks hit the market, over 100,000 square feet. Where are we going with this, Michael Gottlieb?
Well, I go back to my first slide, which was the research that, started more than 20 years ago. It is entirely possible, companies are reporting earnings. Earnings haven't been significantly decreased. As you listen to the news every day, now companies are starting to report third quarter earnings. Many companies are blowing away the estimates. And so you sort of wonder how could that happen if the world is shut down? And you kind of draw the conclusion that the world is not shut down. It's just we're working differently. But if you're not in the hospitality and the leisure industry and the sport, related to sporting event industry and travel and all of that, you're still working. We're all working. And so, I think what I said at the beginning of this conversation was you could see now a divergence where the S&P 500 index is no longer the benchmark and no longer holds and carries the asking rents, trying to tracking at 100% correlation, because we could see a time where, companies are doing well, the S&P continues to do well, but, there's no supply of inventory, and that goes back to economics 101, supply and demand. So I think that in terms of a forecast, I think we're going to have some bumps in the road ahead of us. I think that there's going to be a reset on pricing. But I think like everything else, at a certain price, the buyers step in. I think it's going to be some troubling times ahead if you're a landlord and you're highly leveraged. I think you're going to have to really figure out how you're going to work through these issues over the next couple of years. And I think it's going to take a couple of years to sort out the impact of COVID, not on COVID itself, but the way in which we now work and what that does for real estate occupancy. Even if the economy continues to chug along, we may be looking at a very different reality in terms of how people use space and the ripple effect that that's going to have. So I think ultimately Manhattan has always come back. We've been through, in our lifetimes, a lot of really hard hits, not only locally, but domestically and globally. And Manhattan always comes back because it's a draw. People want to be here. There's a young millennial vibe of people that want to be here, and at the end of the day, a lot of people, their workspace is their social life. They don't only have outside of the office. And so they want to be back with their friends, with their colleagues, with people that they enjoy hanging out with during the day and after work. And so I think there will be a resurgence, and I'm seeing it now because I really feel that activity has picked up in the market. Even though companies aren't back in the office, there are more tours. Our clients are going on more tours. Our clients aren't as afraid to go into the city and go to different buildings and see what space looks like. And I know there's a lot of virtual tours out there too. You can click on something, but people don't really get the same feel in clicking through something and walking through space on a computer screen as you do when you actually go there and you can feel the space and feel the ceiling height and feel the view out the window. It's different. So I think in the short run, I think we have some obstacles. I think we have some hurdles. I'm happy to hear Mike say that, we're going to know what's happening in the city by June and not necessarily next November, because it doesn't the time frame within which this uncertainty exists. But I think in the long run, Manhattan's going to come back, the city's going to come back, and we're going to be stronger for it when we get there.
That's great. Thank you, Michael Gottlieb. Michael Keogh, let's end on a positive note. Just really how Michael Gottlieb summed up our world and the real estate. This is New York, so please take a couple minutes, please.
Sure. I mean, we have a lot of challenges that are happening. A lot of people, like take a microcosm of everything that's going on is the MTA, New York City subways. There's a lot of attention paid to that ridership is down and so on like that. But the MTA is actually spending a lot of time not just cleaning the cars, but also getting a lot of capital projects moving and making improvements to the subway system in a number of different areas so that people will see something different and better than when they stopped riding the subways as frequently as they used to. So with every challenge, there is an opportunity. There is an opportunity to do things better than we did them before. We have to work through what is it going to take for that to happen. And there isn't just one answer for it. It is going to take people stepping up, challenging their government to do better by them, whether it is in the economic sphere, whether it is in a social justice movement, whether it is in what is the quality of life that we are all going to live with in the city of New York, and will it be fair for as many people that are in this city that make up this city? These are challenges that a lot of people are stepping up and meeting, even with the risk of COVID. And I think that we're also going to see in New York this weekend, as early voting opens up, I think we're going to see more people wanting to invest in the future, not just of the city, but of the country overall, even though there's a pandemic going on. So the fact that people want things to get better and will take steps to do that, even if there's a risk to them to do so, is what gives me hope. And the fact that we have so many people who now want to be mayor. If this city was going under, we would have a hard time trying to fill that job. So I am optimistic about where we are going, even though we don't necessarily know where we're going or how we're going to get there.
Well, thank you for sharing it. One thing, if I may add, was I participated in an interesting conversation in my capacity of real estate, co-head of real estate committee for the Queens Chamber of Commerce. And we had a panel discussion specific to Queens, and amazing to hear a lot of the professionals in the retail sector talk about how strong their markets were, partly because a lot of the folks that live in the neighborhood are now working in the neighborhood, partly because a lot of those folks don't have the ability to leave the city. But it was interesting to hear how strong those neighborhoods are, and great to hear, right? Because this is a city built on neighborhoods, right? So
yeah.
If the outer boroughs can help lead us out of this would be great too. But I'm going to check and make sure we answered all the questions, which I have. I think we covered a lot of ground today, and we could spend several hours on this topic. But we want to thank everyone for joining us here today, and we really look forward to furthering these conversations. I want to thank Michael Gottlieb and Michael Keogh for their work in the community, and have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Bye, Mike.